This is the stat features in eManagement. This is going to be a really in-depth walkthrough. We're going to go through every single feature and what it does and all the different options. So if you get bored, feel free to skip ahead. Try to put chapters in this so that you could find what you need. This will probably get broken down, so you can probably find individual parts of this video in different parts, but here is everything. So all starts with creating stats. So when you press create stat, you get two options. You get stat name, how often will you update this stat? So this is just to make it easy, so you can create a stat here, or you can click advanced options. And then when you click advanced options, how often would you like to update this becomes entry method. So that's the name of that actual field. We have a bunch of different options, and so I'll go through all those next. But let's just create one so you can see what it looks like. So if I create one called tutorials made, right? Or let's say number of tutorials made. So by default, this will be set to me as the stat owner and my current division if I have one. Not saved. So it gets added always to the top here. Later, when you refresh the screen, it's going to be put where it would go normally based on the alphabetical or the sort order that we have. So we're not sorting by employee name. By default, when nothing is selected, it's sorted by the stat name. So this is just alphabetical. So let's see, to go further into this, we also have sort by division department. So if a stat has a division department, it will go by the name of that division department. So E is before S here. Show you what that looks like. And yeah, the employee name is just that name of the employee here. So if I sort now by employee name, then we can see that Austin is before Eric there. Okay. This is also zoomed in a bit to make it easier to see on a small screen. So normally all this is in the same view without scrolling, but that's just some extra little data. Okay, so the next option we're going to go through is the filter options. So in filters, we have all stats. So this is the same as having nothing. This is all stats throughout the company for anyone that isn't private. So there is a field in settings called private. And so, so it's name and then the one to the side. So primary, sum average, generate 0, private, and then share. So this is private. So if private is active, then this stat won't show up in all stats or no stat filter unless that user is the stat owner or the manager of the stat owner in the employee setup. Also, if you're an admin over stats, then you're going to see all stats, regardless if it's private or not. So that's all stats. My stats, this is only going to show the stats that belong to you. So you can see here, this has only Austin. That Eric stat is now missing that I had created. Now with that gone, it goes back to everyone. So now we see the stat for Gabriella and Eric here again. Okay, so then we have tags. So tags you can add to stats. Oh, sorry, something weird. So tags you can add to stats. So if I click here, I can add a tag, and it shows GDS and integrations. If I add a new one, let's say this is going to be called main stats. You can have a space in here, and then you press enter, and then that is another one of these options. So something can have multiple stats. So like this one, I can give to all three of those. And just to make this easier, I'm going to name this stat views. Okay, so now we can see it has these tags listed here, but also that main stat is added to the tags here. So if I click main stat, I'm going to see any stat that has that tag. If I go to integrations, then again, any stat that has that tag, and GDS. So multiple stats have this tag. So this shows up for those plus those. It's also worth noting that only one filter type at any time shows. So I can have filter plus I can have a sort option. Then I can also type something like GI. Those all show up. But if I type something new, like by, then it replaces that. So similarly, if I put in a new filter here, per like this little section thing, like I can't have all stats and my division, see, those replace each other. But I can have the tag GDSs, and that replaces that, but leaves that there, just so you understand how those things work. Okay, so that's tags. So, you can remove and edit those. It's not case sensitive. So if I type, or I think it's not case sensitive, let's see here. So I have that, and I press enter, then it auto-corrected to lowercase, because that's how that tag was before. So let's see. Those filters. So then we also have filter by weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. So this is that entry type or the date type that we had talked about before. Those are the same thing. So if I click weekly now, it's only going to show me stats that are weekly. If I click monthly, it's going to show me stats that are monthly, as far as their entry type. Yes, and the feature that will work, so AI, just know that works. Okay, so then we have sales. So this is then by division, so any of the divisions that have been created for the company. I'll show you how to create those in a second. It will only show stats that belong to that division. You create divisions or set divisions right here, and you can use this plus to create a new division. Then also in settings, you can go over and you can edit the divisions. So colors, stuff like that, change order. Okay. So then, continuing to go through our options here. So we have date type. So this is similar to the filter, except for, it looks similar, but we're not filtering now by it, we're changing it. So like this stat was entered weekly, right? That's its entry method, or sorry, its date type here is weekly. Oh, so then to correct earlier, how often will you update the stat becomes date type. Okay, so then going back to this, so this stat is entered weekly. There's weekly values. You can also, so you can see all those here. So then if I click on monthly here, interval is now set to monthly, it then changed how this is calculated. And so this is calculated in a really advanced way, rather than simply taking most stat softwares, if you try to view something weekly as monthly, it's just going to look at the day that it was entered for, so usually that Friday. So for instance, let's go and look at this stat here. So we can see the values entered weekly, right? And so this was that end of the week date, which I believe is a Friday in this case. So that stat can be entered daily, or for that day. And so when we're converting it to monthly, most things would just say, okay, well, what month did this day show into? So for instance, all these, if you looked for monthly, it would just combine these values together. If you looked at April, it would combine those values together. However, looking at this, that part of April was actually, or the week ending on April 4th was part of March. And similarly, this actually fit into it perfectly. But, if we look down over here, if we look down over here and we go to other dates, then we can see that like the 17th doesn't fit perfectly into it, or the week after this or the week before this, these things don't fit perfectly. So anyways, what we do here is we actually break it down to the days of the week that you're working. So if you work Monday to Friday, then it would say, okay, well, this might actually be all in this week, or I think then the last day of March would end up being in that same week. But so it would then break that down and divide this by 5 in that case, and then take 1/5 of that and then add it to March. So it's more accurate when you're looking at the months, what it's actually determining. So anyways, when you have that monthly filter on any stat, regardless of how it was entered, will show up in that way. So then separately, all right, and there's default, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly, and they all work that same way. So similarly, if I, let's say, take a monthly stat, I don't know if I have any in here, but if a stat is entered monthly natively, get rid of that filter, and then it'll go and shows us right here how it was entered. Yeah, so these are all weekly stats. Let's say I take this newer stat of number of tutorials made, and I'm going to make this monthly. And then I'm going to kind of quickly go and add some values. This is stat. This is the easiest way. So I can import here, or I can press add a value row, which add it for today. And then I can say this is 500, and then add next row. So this is going 1 month from today. That's the way that works. So this is, okay, so now we have 2 months of data. A little bit to play around. I'll show these features a little bit more at the end. So over here now I can take these two, and if I want to go and view it as, let's say, weekly, it then breaks that down based on those months. And you'll notice that like May 2nd has a smaller amount than all the other parts of May. That's because this being on the 2nd, only some of those values would be here. So it's doing that same sort of breakdown of going to the days and then reconstructing from there. So again, yeah, pretty accurate. And you're able to really play around with dates and kind of see how they'll play with each other. So if you want to instead, like let's say this stat here, I've been entering it monthly, but now I want to start entering weekly. I can, instead of just previewing or seeing it temporarily with the date type, I can go over here and I can change this to weekly. So this is going to do that same conversion for past periods. Oh, 1 second, let me. Right, but now when I try to enter a new value, it's going to let me enter it. Sorry, 1 second. So now it's going to let me enter it weekly. So now that I can enter it weekly, it will kind of accept those dates like for the next period. Let's say I'm going to do something in the week of May 2nd. I can then throw a number here. So now that lives alongside this data. So even though when we look at it, it's in different formats, it will let us do that. So if you have a stat and you're starting to keep things monthly because it's a small team, and then as you get bigger, you go, okay, I want to keep this weekly or daily, this will support showing that data properly, all in alignment. So you don't have to create a new stat that's weekly or daily. You can just modify that type and it'll keep all that data in line. And all the conversions and stuff will still work with it. Okay, so then on to number of periods. So I'm just going to change this back to monthly so we have it like that. Okay, so now on to number of periods. So let's say we have a stat over here and it has some good data in it. Actually, I'm going to do it's a little bit simpler. Okay, so then we can do and look at periods. So we can look at, by default, it's showing us the last 12, but we can say last 6. We can say last 52, right? So this is kind of a really simple way to just kind of see the data, and as you click through, it'll stay showing the last 12. So even if something has been entered for a while, it's going to take the most recent value, then go 52 weeks before or 12 weeks before. And also in here, if I then change to, like, let's say I have 6 periods, but then I change it to monthly, now it's going to show me the last, well, up to the last 6 months. So we don't have that much data in here, but it's, entering those values. So these two things play really well together for a really simple kind of going through things. Now, some users don't like having just the last 12. They want to be able to say, okay, I want this exact range. I'm going to do maybe a stat analysis. So we have two options for that. So one is select dates. So here, it just kind of jumped in and did that same 12-week thing initially, but I can go and I can say, great, I want to see specifically between these 2 date periods. So it's then going to show me that up to that data if we have it. So obviously if the data isn't there, it's not going to graph it. But so this kind of lets us play with that up to those periods. And then, so you can really get very precise with this. A lot of users like using this as their main one. Totally fine, just up to you. So then additionally, we have the range slider. So the slider now gives us an option to drag here. So this is really great for when you're kind of, now you might look at something on like a broader scale and go, okay, well, ooh, some really high numbers over there. What was going on? It's kind of fun to play and look at how it bounces around with data. Then you can go and you can see and play with it closer. So this ties really well into some other features that we're going to go over into next. But yeah, that's the number of periods option. So in the stat list view, right? So this is the stat list view. We also have stat grid. And so stat grid doesn't have the slider because it would be a slider for each stat, and that would be a little bit more confusing. So we just have the select dates as the kind of option if you want that more range type here. And then stat sheet only supports this one because trying to do the last 12 when you have dates and maybe something doesn't have that, it just gets very confusing. So this only has the select date option from this view. And we'll kind of dive into all those views towards the end. Okay, so now we have the number of periods and we have this range slider. And so this gets enacted or activated automatically when playing with these little options. So this is exclusive to the stat list view. In this view, we have show labels, right, which displays labels like that. Obviously, when you hover, you see it, but this works really great. Like if you want to print, you also have accumulate. So this is showing for the range that you have visible, whether, through whatever filtering option you have, it shows how those combine. So this is really great, and it shows that on the side here and then the normal scale here. So this is really great if you're trying to show something like, in that month you're trying to reach a goal when you're, you have that more thermometer mindset, then this view is perfect for that. It makes it really, really easy. Also for this, since we're playing with colors change and are a little bit different based upon whether you have light mode or dark mode. Sorry if that was abrasive to your eyes. Okay, so accumulate, that's what that looks like. You can see it here. And then we now get into a little bit more advanced. So this is compare stats. So in here I have one stat selected now, but actually let me turn that off. Grab a stat. So this calls out Eric and calls out Gabby. So these people have the same values in the same time periods, and they're measuring the same thing. So these are two employees. We want to compare them. Press compare stats. And so now I can have that stat, and then I can select this other person, and then this range slider, which is the only way to play with this. This is going to let us see how these two people compare in any one particular period. So we can see exactly how, and the main one is going to, that's that darker blue, it's going to be properly colorized. And then everyone else is going to have a color that kind of matches. So we can continue to click on stats. We'll need stats that all have stuff in the same range. So this one has to be, of like kind kind of for this view to really play with. But like I can click on, if I only have two, so let's say I get rid of Gabby, I just have this, and then I have the dollars per call. I can click on different scale. So now let's this scale be here and this scale be that. So if you're trying to compare something like, you know, a gross income, or here, let's tap that one out, and let's go to say yeah, so you can see the scales differently there. So let's kind of quickly make a gross income stat just to allow for better playing. So I'm going to turn off all of this. And then I'm going to click over here. I'm going to say okay, so what I can actually do here is I'm going to show you another kind of cool, more advanced feature. So in the edit values view, we have this, and it's basically a spreadsheet. So I can actually copy from here. So I can say, great, I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to grab this period. And then I'm going to go over to this gross income stat I just made. I can go over here. I have to have at least one row, then I can paste. Okay, let's skip that. I guess the periods have to exist in the graph, so now I can paste. Now this will, oof, sorry about that. And this will have some values for those periods as I had pasted in. So a little bit clunky, but just to kind of show you some cool functionality for that. So let's say I want to have this be gross income, so then I can say, put some larger numbers. Just so we have some data to play with, and then add those periods there. April 11th. Actually, I'm going to delete this. It's just kind of showing how to play with this. It can be a little bit clunky, but so I can take this week. So this last value, if I press next row, it's going to show add in the week after it. Refresh. It seems to have kind of lost its store there. Going to the gross income. Yeah. Almost done. Oh, I see why. Okay, so now I can click add next row, and this brings me all the way to this week, so then I can throw in a few more data points. Okay, so now I have data that I can play with. And so now I can look at this and I can say, all right, I'm going to do compare stats. And then I'm going to click on Eric. And then I'm going to click on, I have gross income. Okay, so now if I want to show, I have Eric selected, and then I want to show I can show Gabby. So Gabby here is in the same range. I have one range selector to show. So I can kind of drag that and see, and this is the only date filter or period filter that works with this. And we say periods instead of dates because of the weekly, monthly thing. So you're like, number of last 12 periods, etc. But okay, so and we can kind of see this and play around with it there. But if we have stats that are of different types, so let's say instead of Gabby, I want to look at gross income. And I'm in the range for both of those. Well, then one of them is very, very low, one of them is very high. So I can click on this different scale. And so now it shows the income on this side and then the numbers on the outside. You can compare like how is his calls matching up with the GI. Is it, affecting it properly, or, what's the stat that's having the effect on this? And so that can be really, really powerful. So then I also can go and look at compare ranges. So let's say I'm looking at this stat of calls out Eric, and I want to compare range. So now I have two different sliders and I can see how his numbers have added up over time against each other. So that is also really powerful and really useful. Okay, so the way that the compare stats feature works is we have this stat like calls out Eric. So I can click compare stats and I instantly get that range view. So then if I click on another stat now, it's going to show that. So this one is still in this colorization. And then the one, it kind of matches here. So if we select more stats here, like if I now select this stat, then that kind of shows this lighter blue. So obviously that's in a different range, which I'll show you in a second what that means. But the colors kind of match, so you can keep track of what the first one, this blue one, is those colors. So now as I drag this along, I can see those two stats compared to each other. So none of the other filters work with this. This only works with the range slider because it compares the values so nicely. So additionally, let's say instead of looking at Gabby, I want to compare him to gross income, right? So put those in the same range. We have values for both of them. And it looks kind of crazy because you can only see these and this is all smushed in. So if I click on different scale, then now we can see how those values actually compare to each other because they're in the same range or the same time period. So yeah, that works really well. And then I can also say, well, what if I want to look at, let's say just this one stat. I want to look at how Eric's calls have compared over time. Well, I can put in the compare range. Now it's going to give me two sliders for this one stat. So I can see, okay, well, how did he do in this period versus that period? And kind of match them up. The dates are here. It's a lot of data on the screen now, so this can be a bit confusing, but it's very useful when you need it to see like how one period, how 1 year or something compares to the other. So additionally, if I want to then say I want to compare the ranges, like not the same range, but the ranges of, maybe by like a 6-week difference or something, I can put on compare stats and I can put on compare stat ranges. And so now I can click on this stat and then that stat. And then they have two different scales for the two different stats. And then I can go and see how those things compare. And then I do have the different scale there too, in case that's relevant. So those are all of those kind of analysis mode options. So then additionally, we can look at this quick add mode. So this just makes it really easy to add stats. You can see your little stat list view here, and then you can just throw in a number, press enter, and then it will now be on that graph. And it's just going to enter it for today. So it will show you a value if there is a value already today. If I put in a new value here, it will override that value. So now this will show me that. It just adds it for today. So on a stat day where you just want to go through and quickly go, then that's really useful. This little arrow, what that is showing is whether or not the last period you're looking at is up or down. So if you are just looking to see, okay, if the stat has been updated. So if it has been updated yet, you don't have another option that we're going to go for called generate zero on, then it's going to show just that last week. But yeah, this just gives it really easy if you're trying to like count up which stats are up and down or keep track of an area. And that's the quick add mode for entering those values without having to do it the other way. So additionally, when entering values, so we have this stat, which is a calculating stat. And that means that if you look under the hood here, it's taking stats and it's combining them. This is taking gross income and then it's adding the total calls out. But I could also do that, and I can say multiplied by total calls out or divided. So like how much dollars per dial are there? And then that's a calculating stat. So I can't enter values here because it gets entered on individual stats. This stat I can enter the value this way. I can also go add value. It's going to automatically give me the current week's ending. And if it's for Saturday, like today, it's going to give me that previous week because I'm still like kind of in that week that I'd be entering it for. So it kind of tries to think, but you sometimes need to edit that, but that just stays consistent across all stats. So you put a value in, put in a note, bingo, bango. Over here, you can click add past row, add next row. So past and then next, before and after. And then you can just throw in the numbers here, so that can be really fast. You can also like paste. So if I can like copy that, I can paste it from a different software. Like if I put in numbers here, this is just a notes field, but I can't select them because they're notes. But yeah, so I could put in that there, and then I can copy these two. I can copy those two, and then I can paste them here. So lots of copying and pasting, which is really great when you have like an Excel sheet and you want data to go in. You can also import, so I can import stat values. I'll map them, and I could say, okay, well, this is what each of those rows equal, then I can import it that way. So there's a lot of ways that you can enter stats, and then additionally, on this you have the same adding options. You don't have the quick add option on the stat grid, but on stat sheet you can double click on a stat and enter it. You can't enter any stats that aren't in the type, so like this is a monthly interval, so then I can only enter the monthly stats because otherwise I wouldn't know how to enter it. But if I change this to weekly, then now I can enter that one, but I can't enter these ones. So just to kind of give you an idea of all the different ways that you can enter values in stats. And then, of course, we also have integration, so you can have stats going automatically based on like, Google review, or when you get paid on Stripe or get a new review. Any of those things can then end up with stats automatically. So additionally, so those are all of the basic options from the filter pane and from the analysis mode. So then into the stat options, we have something called generate zero. So generate zero, all right, so down here, we can set it as the primary stat, which means that it's like the main stat for that employee. That ends up being what shows up here on their dashboard. That's all that affects. And then on the next option down here, we have sum average. So that means that when we're looking at something monthly, so that here we have a weekly stat. So I want to look at this stat monthly, summarizing those values, right? Or let's look at this one. Easier, right? So it's adding those values together. But what if it's a stat like the number of employees? I don't want it to add those up when I'm looking at it monthly. I want it to instead, average them. So now instead of getting the total calls, I'm getting the average number of calls in that period. So it ends up being really helpful, like when you're looking at something like that you don't want added up. So you're looking for like the average, grade of students or the average number of employees. So that's what that sum average does. Then we have generate zero. So generate zero will add 0 periods for a stat. So So now it's bringing in empties or zeros for any periods that weren't added. So if I click over here and then I remove this April 4th, then now it's adding a 0 for that. If I go over here and then I turn that off and refresh it, so now it's only showing the values that were added. This is really useful, especially if you have a stat that you don't always get, like support request maybe, or items returned, you don't have to go in and put 0 every week. Oh, I have 0 items returned, but it's data you need. So therefore, this generate 0 button, which is turned on by default, super, super useful for showing that. So then you also have private. So we already went over what private was, but that means that a stat won't show up if a stat is, the stat won't show up if it is, if someone's looking and they're not an admin and it's not assigned to them, it just will disappear. So really great for stuff like maybe your total assets owned or gross income if you don't want employees knowing that. And then share is specific to if you have like a consultant. They can have a different Hue Management account. You can click share, and then in settings, you can activate, or you can put them as the as your manager. So that is. So they would select your company and get an email, and then those stats that have share on them would then be given access to that, consultant or that managing body or something like that. Okay, so then the other options, description, this just helps people know what it's for or how you track it. Scaling, by default we have auto scale, but you can also put a custom scale. So when you have that off, like these aren't actual values, but what it's going to do is it's going to bring in that, let's look at a different stat, this one. So auto scale, it's going to grab and say, okay, well, we're going to put 20 as the lowest value because that's the round number right under 22. But you can also have that completely off. And so it's still doing auto scale, but then I can say the floor is 0 and the ceiling is 500. Now we can see that this is scaled with those ceilings and floors. So if custom scaling is important to you, then that's the option for that. Back on auto scale. So then we also have the start date. So this is really just informational purposes. If you have it automatically is recorded when you create a stat, but you might have, we only started keeping this on this date. So you can record that there. Setting the division and owner. This mainly affects those filters like my stats and, when you're using those division filters. We have stat type, so we have up, down, inverted. So standardly it's up, down. Inverted means that it would be here. So now I can see that the highest numbers are at the bottom and the lowest numbers are at the top. You can also set it to range. So for range, now it's going to look at this range field. So I can say this is, say 50. Now I see this little line here. And so now instead of these, the colorization of stats being based on whether it's up, down, now it's looking at whether or not it's above that line. So it's still showing standardly, so it's not inverted, but then it's saying, okay, well, it's only green if it's above that line, and even if it's, the stats going up, it's still negative because it's not at that minimum or whatever area you want. So if you set this to 0 on this view, and then refresh it, so now everything is green, and then you can still have that view. So if I set that to 50 again, and then I have it be up, down, it's still going to show up there so people can know what's expected of them, but it's not going to change how it's colored or like what's determined up or down on that side. So then we have entry method. So calculating, now I can grab and create math equations, and these can be really complicated. Plus, minus, multiply, divide, and then you can have it either do a stat or a number. So if you want like a percentage, you have this stat, and then divided by this stat, and then multiplied by 100. That would give you a good percentage. There's no percentage option as far as like just setting it to percentage, but you can put any field here you want. And then here, I'm just going to put that back to manual entry. So with that there, now it just shows a percentage. So suffix, prefix, whatever you want before or after on that stat. So then that's manual entry. We already went over date type and then tag. So those are all the different options you have on individual stats. Oh, and then you can also go to here and then you can click on archive, which doesn't delete it, but just puts it in an archived area. So like these are my currently archived stats. I can unarchive it. So if I want to see like number of employees, I can unarchive that, go over here. And then now that stat will show up again. If you are on the free version, then, oh, this is clearly custom scaled. So if you're on the free version, then that's really useful because you can only have 6 stats active at any time, but you can have stats archived and unarchive them as you need. And then you can delete and you can also copy. So if I have this entire stat, I'm going, great, I have another stat who's going to keep our employee, I can press copy, and then that creates a copy of that stat. So not the values, but all the settings, tags, all that stuff will be copied over. That's really useful when you're adding a new employee and need to duplicate a stat. So then we have in the stat grid view, so in stat list, you can only print out the one stat you have open at a time. It always prints not in dark mode. But in stat grid, you can look at 2 stats or 3 stats at the same time. And then in here, you can either print that individual stat or you can print in bulk. And it's going to print 1 stat per page. And then you can set labels on the broader scale here for all those. And then in stat sheet, there's no printing views, but what you can do that's kind of cool is I can select like this range here and I can create chart, and then I can look at it graphed. So this just makes it a little bit easier to grab like different ranges or little precise periods and see them graphed. It also makes entering values really fast because I can quickly, go through and do something like that. And you can see on a small delay, if I update like this stat here, it updates the calculating stats that are related to it. And so that is stats. That's how it all works. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.